Hello everyone, welcome to the episode third of Daily Dose of Tech. I'm your friend Nishko, and you are watching the third episode of this series. As I have explained in previous videos, this series is kind of a place where we come up and study together for 60 minutes and without any preparation and any script, just going with the flow. And the only goal of this series is to study a specific topic in the deepest possible manner without any preparation, so that we can come up with a better content which we can create a later course with more of a organized way. Yesterday we covered Azure Bicep and we did the second episode of Azure Biceps. Were able to we were about to deploy our resources to Azure. Azure. We were able to log into Azure. We configured our Azure CLI. We selected our tenant. We did everything. Now I think today is time to deploy the actual resource, our first resource using Azure Biceps. Before I start, I will just gonna start the timer the for so that we can get 25 after 1 hour. So it's already 1 minute 22 seconds, so probably I'm gonna set the timer this time for 58 minutes 0 something, and I'm gonna start. All right. Okay, so before starting, just quickly we are gonna revise everything that we did in the last 2 days since the starting of this specific topic, which is Azure Bicep. So we obviously this is really important if you are interested to following and getting along with me on this series where we come up and study everything just naturally. You can follow me on YouTube. Obviously I'm available on Instagram, LinkedIn, GitHub. I love to follow on GitHub. You can ask me anything on X. And if you are interested to do more on a hands-on practice, or you want to work along with me on a specific project or something, you can join our Discord channel. We are working on making the biggest Discord community channel in the IT, so you can join the Discord channel as well. Now moving to our topic, I'll just move my face on the side. Okay, so we started with Azure Bicep. We know that it's not a crazy programming language. It's just a language which Azure used to understand, and they kind of Azure understands, and they use it for deployment of infrastructure, and it is only specific to Azure. And all the resources that are present on Azure that you can see on the Azure marketplace can be deployed via this Bicep language, which is also known as the infrastructure as a code, if you are interested in this. Now we studied that what are the different ways to do the deployment to Azure. So we have Azure portal, we have Azure CLI, we have Azure PowerShell, we have Bicep and Terraform, and out of these everything, Bicep and the Terraform are used to write and save your configuration, and kind of basically these are used for your infrastructure as a code. Now we studied after that what are the benefits of Biceps. First of all, very simple to write, and it's going to produce all the result repeatedly, but there is a catch. I'll show it later in the videos. You can see your changes without even deploying. You can see what are things and how it's going to affect your environment. You can preview your changes basically. So the Bicep has its feature. It can orchestrate. By this it means that it is able to handle different deployment at the same time. So it's depending upon how we are writing the Bicep file, it will able to understand and do the deployment in the same way. Modularity, yeah, as any other programming language, any other language, it's the feature of the language to kind of has the ability to organize into different files. You can do that in here as well. You can create Bicep files for different purpose. You can create and create it in a way that is only be used by a specific team, where they have to access specific property of specific resource, so that you can delegate your work as well. So you can play around with the concept of creating a module and then delegating your work, so that they can use this file to deploy their infrastructure. And the most important thing, no cost. Azure Bicep is having no cost to use. That's why it's the most adoptable language for deployment by the industry, and you will be likely to get benefit if you have the have the skill of writing Bicep and deploying through Bicep, because all the initial tech companies who are kind of not big in size, they prefer Bicep because it's no cost and it's open source, and it's already backed by Azure, and it's all keep updating it. So it's the best. Bicep is the best infrastructure as a code language for deploying things on Azure. Okay, we started and we figured out that before even understanding to Bicep and deploy our things resources to Azure, we need to have the understanding of the scopes. Although there is a separate lecture we can create around this specific topic, which is very important, but what I want to conclude here is that there are 4 scopes where you can deploy your resources. One at the tenant, which is the topmost scope, and then at the management group, subscription, and the lowest group is resource group. Obviously these are also type of resources, you can deploy them via Bicep as well, but the catch is that you cannot contain one thing into the another. So you cannot have a resource group into deploy into another resource group. So Azure doesn't work in that way. So a quick note here that I want you to focus is that not all resources are deployable to all the resources, and that's what I meant, that there are some resources which you can deploy only via the which you can deploy only to a specific type of scope. For example, I think Azure policies you cannot deploy on the resource group. It's always going to be on the subscription. Resource group you cannot deploy on resource group because no similar resource can be deployed. It's like deploying an app service live to an app service in terms of Azure. Okay, then moving to the next slide, we understand the Azure provider and Azure type. So Azure provider are kind of a group which is responsible for maintaining the APIs around a specific type of resources in Azure, a specific categories of Azure. For example, Azure Compute is a resource provider, and it contains different types of resources. So within a provider has different types of resources which the provider is responsible to maintain and understand the properties and create it for you. So it eventually accepts all the properties, it eventually analyzes and checks all the properties and give the results back to you that you have requested for them to deploy. In this specific slide, what you're seeing behind me, I'll just move my face a little bit up. So basically, let's revise quickly. So basically it used to provide manage and resources. Obviously we can have multiple resource type. Azure Resource Manager uses providers to deploy resources. Okay, resource manager. So eventually whatever we are writing in our Bicep and using CLI to deploy that Bicep, all the request goes to the Azure Resource Manager, and Azure Resource Manager then forwards it to the right type of provider, which then create a specific types present in our present under its jurisdiction. So for example, Azure Compute is a provider, and Azure Compute can have these types of services within under it, and they are going to understand your properties and everything. The very good I can say the resource or official documentation that is there, so you can visit always on this documentation. This is all about what are the different resource provider Azure has and what are the different types of resources they are having under that provider. So we have AI and machine learning resource provider, then we have analytics where we have Databricks, data catalog, all the data related thing. Obviously we have some blockchain providers where we have a blockchain tokens, all this thing. We have the compute, which I just showed you on the slide. You can deploy, they have the responsibility to deploy app platform, compute, which is obviously a virtual machine scale set, hands on Azure, something like that, lab services, maintenance, my quantum. So Azure Quantum is also under the compute, I just observed. So it's cool that, and there is a container, container registry, container services, Red Hat, OpenShift is a part of container, right? So yeah, you can visit around this. You can just take a feel that what are the different services that on the Azure and under which kind of category it comes as a provider, right? How this is gonna help, because when you are writing your Bicep, you have to provide an API. That API represent what type of resource you want to deploy, right? And there comes the relation of provider and types, because you will get more familiar with the deployment and be comfortable what to use when you have a very super clear understanding of the provider. And eventually when you are writing things up, you're gonna get know about it soon. Now In the very first video of this series, of this specific topic, we started with deploying our biceps. For that, I installed Bicep Azure CLI on my Mac. You can do the same on Windows if you are working on, and on the Linux, other Linux provider as well. Then after installing the Bicep, I had to install AZ. So I have to use the the Bicep is ready. Sorry, the Azure CLI is ready. So I can use the AZ command to execute any of the properties which it has. So after downloading the Azure CLI, you have to use AZ Bicep, and there would be a property, I forgot to write it here. There is property AZ Bicep install. So that this command you have to run to install the Bicep specifically on top after you install the Azure CLI. Azure CLI is must for the Bicep. I mean, if you want to use the CLI for PowerShell, you can use PowerShell as well. Okay, now moving to the next slide is that we started creating our first Bicep file. So I'm going to show you what we did again, and now this is the important thing from where we're going to start our today's topic. That is, once, let's suppose we are ready. We are ready with a Bicep file. We will now deploy it to a group, to a subscription, to a management, or to a tenant. So I'm gonna we'll start from here. So basically this this argument, Azure deployment, is used to deploy your Bicep configuration and Bicep file. And Bicep file is nothing but the how can I say, it's the property and the types that you want to deploy, and you can do the same via the CLI, but we are deploying the file via the deployment flag. So you could have provided this property as a a key and value structure as well in the CLI itself, but it's very difficult to debug and troubleshoot and all those things and correct things. So we are maintaining a Bicep file. That's the only purpose. So and AZ deployment can be used to deploy the group, to subscription, to management, to tenant. So we have to keep in mind. And now we will be starting to see how we are now going to continue from here. Because I didn't prepare any other notes after this slide, because we have to now in this today's video target to deploy things on the Azure using the Azure deployment. So I'll go to my VS Code. I hope it's visible to you. I'm gonna just increase okay, I'm just gonna increase this. I mean, I will reduce this. I want to just increase the font, but I'll do that later. So let me just clear this thing. All right, so as you know, AZ account show we did is gonna tell us that what is the name of my subscription, what is my tenant ID, and these things, which is kind of the properties where my things are gonna get deployed. So we'll come back to this later. Now it's time to deploy things on our subscription, because we in the previous video started preparing a Bicep file for the resource group, and now we know that resource group cannot be deployed to a resource group scope, so we have to deploy it to the subscription. For subscription, the command start with Azure deployment sub, and now we are gonna use the same Azure deployment here to reference this file, which is already present in our environment here, my resource group. Let me rename it, my first resource group file, right? As always, I do spelling mistakes while typing the name. RESOURC, Azure, my first Azure resource group. Okay, I mean my first resource group, right? All right. So we're going to start writing our CLI command, which starts with AZ deployment sub, which means subscription, and to create our deployment we'll go with create. Now, because this is a file which contains our property of the things which we want to deploy, so we are going to provide the file name to it, which starts with -f, and we are going to provide my first resource group. Wait a second, why it's not AZ deployment file? Okay, maybe I have to delete this because I changed the name, so I have to refresh the context for it. So I'll type it again. I just created a new terminal. Let me just have it clear. Okay, my bad. So I cleared the terminal. Let's start again. AZ deployment sub create minus file my first resource group. So now it's able to understand, because the session, my previous terminal, which was having a different sessions, while it was on, I changed my file name, so it was not having the context that my file got changed. But here it is. The parameter we do not need to provide, because let's see, because I do not know. Usually there is no information here that we should be providing, but it's gonna ask us the parameter for us, or otherwise if it finds that it has everything with it, it's gonna use the same bicep and the default name. Now the very important thing here is that for the deployment there is a command, there is also a parameter, there is an argument which we have to specify, and that is the location. The location is gonna decide where your whole information or your resource is gonna deploy. So and there would be two things, it's kind of important for us to stop here and just explain one more important concept here that I would like to just go with now. First is that the better would be, first I just write Canada Central. Let's say I want to deploy Canada Central, and I prefer to use what if until we are very super sure that what we are going to deploy, and a debug mode to get not bored and see the crazy background scene as well. But the important thing is that there are two locations that we are using at this point of time. First location is that this thing. The first location comes as this thing, and then there is a second location which is coming here. Now both seems to be related, because the value here is getting from the deployment command that we are doing it here. Now it's very important, and I'll show you that what happens when you are providing the the location here, and what is the deployment, what happens when you provide the location here. I'm gonna provide it, explain it to you. So basically this command, whatever we are writing, this is responsible to generate a metadata about your deployment activity, I'll say. This is just containing the information about the event, which is kind of you did a deployment, and that deployment information is kind of stored in the location that you're providing in the command line, which is altogether different from the service which you are trying to create, their location. So this location, which we are writing in the bicep file, is gonna decide that where your service is getting created. Now I'm gonna give you a situation, or more of an example, that let's say I want all my configuration of deployment to be stored in the Canada Central region, which is stated by this bicep file. But the resource, and here in our case it's the resource group, I want to create this resource group in the Canada East region. So right now at this point of time, because it is using a function, it's gonna get it value from here. I can also just go and update this value to Canada East. So now the situation is that when you open your resource group, the location of your resource group is gonna show Canada East, is gonna show Canada East, but the deployment logs or this metadata is gonna get stored in the Canada Central. And let's try with this crazy thing. We are gonna use this configuration only, and then we'll cover when it comes the time to cover the different functions. We're gonna explore that deployment.location, which is taking a by default location from where we are doing the deploy. But because we usually not use that property, and the reason is that you do not want to store your your CLI is kind of ad hoc gonna decide where you want to deploy, but the resource group, it's always a static configurations. It's not like Kubernetes configuration where on the fly your property can change depending upon your environment, but here it's more all your environment direction is going to come from the bicep file. So here it's it we are instructing specifically that it should get deployed to Canada East, and we'll see. Okay, so for now we are ready. Let's now press enter and see how it's gonna deploy, and if it's giving us any error or not. All right, so here you see it's showing us the in progress step. So what it does mean that, I guess at this point of time, it has linted our file, it has converted, and it has analyzed that everything we wrote in the file is correct. So it has started the actual deployment related activity. Now this is the portion which I wanted to show you, kind of a feature of Bicep. So as you remember, we wrote the what if command, as you can see here. Yeah, as you can see here, let me just make it red, that oh my god, we use the what if command here, right? And in the Figma slide I showed you, the benefits of Bicep. There I explained you that we can do preview changes. Now let me go to here. That preview changes is actually this thing. So in the command line, oh, I guess I have to stop it again. So in the command line, when you use the what if command, it's gonna give us a result something here, and this result is just showing you that okay, and it's telling you here that what actual activity is going to happen. So basically it's saying that it's gonna create something with a plus sign, and it's gonna show the resource group. And remember last time we have done a color change, and that color change is helping us here, because usually when I do configuration I haven't set that thing up, so it's always shows us in the white, so it's very difficult to focus things, right? But here what after setting that property, it's obviously green means something positive, right? So it's gonna show us a thing that we are creating something. So that is a visual representation that you can get. And how it helps, it just help you to avoid any error. You will be cautious when something is getting deleted or updated, you will get to know about it. Okay, so what it's saying in the preview, that based on the Bicep file, if you are going to deploy, it is going to use the API version of the resource group to create a resource which is going to have the ID. So in Azure, all the resources are unique, and they are uniquely identified by their ID, which is gonna be like a path where your ID, where your resource is gonna located. So in the subscription, at this specific subscription, we have a resource group type of resource, which with the name my first resource groups, and which I provided that name here, my first resource group. So here you can see that my first resource group is going to get created. As I explained you that I want my resource to get created in the Canada East region, in the Canada East data center of Microsoft. Here it is gonna reflect Canada East, but here in the Bicep, when I have mentioned that the location of this deployment is Canada Central, so there is no reference of Canada Central. And here comes the difference. What you are writing in the Bicep file is going to decide the actual deployment of that resource in a specific region. The command that you are writing on the CLI is going to give the location of the metadata of your deployment history. So this specific deployment history or metadata files is stored in the Canada Central region. Now, this is usually a kind of way, if you are comfortable with your changes, that it's going to deploy this thing which eventually I wanted to do as well. So I'm good with the my changes. What I'll do now, I'm just gonna update my same command. I'll still want to see the debug thing, but I want to now this time remove the what if, because what if just for preview changes, and if you remove that, you actually start doing the deployment. So I'm just going to click here and I'll take you to the Azure itself. Let me just portal.azure.com/home. Hopefully I'll be using this one. So if you see, it's running, it's deploying. I want to show quickly one thing, that this is a subscription where I'm trying to deploy. There is a deployment blade, and here it shows you that my first resource group is deployed. Right now, this information somehow is your metadata, you can say, your deployment history, and it's showing that you created your first thing, your resource group. So what we'll do, we'll go to the subscription, obviously we'll go our resource group, and we will be seeing that my first resource group is present. So I'm going to click here and we'll be seeing my first resource group my first resource group here. Now, okay, this is the as you might be aware if you are kind of pretty frequent with Bicep, but just to set the context in this video, that for all the resources that you're gonna see, it will be having an essential properties which is gonna show it to you on top, that in which subscription the resource is deployed, that subscription ID, how many things you are deploying on the resource group, that's just this property is specific to the resource group type of resources, and the location. So as you can see, the location which we have set in the Bicep file is reflecting here. This means that our resource group or whatever will be deploying in this resource group is gonna be in the Canada East region. Now I'll show you, if you in future decided to have your resource group in the Canada East region, and if you want to deploy the resources inside it in the different region, how it's going to behave. So we'll be experiment with that thing as well. I want to just show you that what we decided, it's gonna replicate it here. Now let's suppose I want to change my name, let's say resource group 1. This is more of a property of Azure, that if you have updated something, how it's gonna behave. And I want to show one thing on, I want to put very clear emphasis here on that I just made the changes in the file. There are a lot of things that I have to explain here. Since when we do deployment of the something at a subscription level, the deployment history we will see obviously on the subscription, right? This is the deployment name. It's one of the property that is kind of set. This is one of the property that we are setting up here, or not setting at the moment, but it comes, and that name is not a default. It's not a required. How can I say, the required argument for you to deploy? But it's good to know. They use the name of my file as the deployment name, but if we want to specifically format the deployment names in a certain pattern that gives more kind of insights to you, for example, I just want to show you quickly. I was doing some previous deployments, and you can see in the subscription, I always want, over the period of time I have analyzed that I should be having some dates so that I can get more information about when I did the deployment. So I did a certain type of encoding in my command line that is gonna put the date and month, July 9, and this is kind of a timestamp, which Unix timestamp, which means at 15, 21, 30 hours. So around 3:30 p.m. I deployed this specific resource. So I give a kind of a name. So what you are gonna give the name here in this specific command for deploying your resource is gonna show you the history of your deployment with that name. And why this is important? Because if you are not setting your deployment name a unique, it's gonna use this, and you made some changes in your Bicep file, you won't see the history. it will get updated in the same old deployment name. For example, because we did not provided Azure resource group, the deployment name, it took the deployment name from my file name, Bicep file name, which is my first resource group. As you can see here, my first resource group. Now the second change which I'm gonna make is that I just modified my name. I added a new one. So ideally, it should be creating a new deployment name. We should be seeing one more history. So, but let's see what happens when we deploy this command again. And you can observe the timestamp. It's 16:12:01, and we have my first resource group as the first thing here. I'm gonna do a refresh. Okay, it got updated to 16:17. What conclusion I'm trying to make here is that we did not make a name change, and it's still running. So if I go here, it's still probably it's completed, but yeah, it's showing that my first resource group, my name got updated. In the previous first deployment, we saw that the name was my first resource group. But let me take you to the resource group section at this point of time. It did not rename that resource. It created a new resource. And the weird thing is that, okay, it created the resource group, but it still used the same deployment name. Now this comes with deploying thousands of resources, this comes, but I want you to understand at only this point of time that what you are giving name here in the command at this point of time. So I use a subscription command, and I did not provided that deployment name. It used my file name, right? But if I am modifying a lot, changing a lot of things in the Bicep file, but still the file remains same and the deployment is showing that name only, it is not going to create a new version of the deployment. And whatever you did in the previous, you will lost the history. For you lost it, but and also the resource did not get modified. It did not rename the existing one. It treated it like a new command, and it deployed a new resource. But let's say the name would have been same. And I just change it to Canada Central. How it's gonna behave? And remember, I'm keeping the name and anything at the same. So the expected behavior which we are gonna see is that here in the deployment, we are still gonna see the my first resource group, but the last modification is gonna get updated. So it's right now 16:17, but when I'm just gonna press enter here, it's gonna get updated to, let's see, I'm gonna go do a refresh one time. 16:17 I did, right? Okay, it failed. It failed because, okay, invalid resource group location, because we cannot have the same name of resource at two different location. That's what I'm concluding. So we were having a Canada Central, Canada East before with the name my first resource group, and then we said that, in the very first version we set that region to Canada East, and then we changed it to Canada Central. Then Azure is complaining, okay, that's good, but you cannot now have the same resource in a different region. So what happens that this is why we come up with the naming conventions, where we provide the unique identification that this is located in a specific location. So we write CC, which means that Canada Central, and now if I do it again, although the name now is a new one, there is a new name, so it's gonna obviously create a new resource group. And as I explained, I did not modified um, the name of the deployment, so it's keeping the name same, but the status here will get changed because now probably my deployment is gonna be successful because I gave a new name and a new location, so it will create it definitely. But you lost your status. How will you know that you did a wrong deployment? Like what happened there? Though that history is lost. So that's why it's very advisable when you are working on production grade, you should give a name to your deployment as well, and do it in a way, in a pattern that you get more insight, just not randomly putting any name. For example, here I did any name, right? My resource group, just give it an insight. And obviously if you want to follow my practice, I have tried to put date and time, some sort of timestamp, because in a day we do a lot of deployment, right? So every deployment is kind of about the same thing, but it done at different duration within that same day. So I provide the timestamp. Okay, take it from the bash timestamp, whatever time you used it started executing, and just show it to me on the deployment, so that it just show that even though we are deploying the same thing every moment, about some minor adjustment we are trying to do, it's creating a new deployment version. This way it's going to show us that if something fails, I'll be able to go back and see the history as well. Okay, we were a bit of off track, but I just want to bring it here back. And again, you can see here will go and it will be creating a new resource group successfully within the same deployment history. And if I go to the resource group tab, it created a new one. Now I want to take one more time, and now I will be updating it to Canada East. And if I just start deployment, obviously it's gonna get fail. Why? Because a same name exists in Canada Central already, so it's gonna give me a deployment failure. Then it gave me the deployment failure, and obviously you can check your error details and all these things here, but most of the time it's useful. But yeah, some of the things are internal services, so you can't do anything with it. You have to check the community how to modify things. But yeah, this we concluded that okay, there's a conflict. So what we're gonna do, we're gonna name it CE, and we are gonna do Canada East. Now it's a new deployment, but again the deployment history is gonna same because we have not provided any name thing here, right? So if I do a refresh here itself, it's just gonna show that it created a new resource group here, created, and it was very comfortable. Of creating a new resources. So with Bicep, whenever you are doing anything, I just want to make it clear right now. So if you see that if I do a refresh here, I will be having CE and CC, two resource groups that we deployed, and both are in different region and they have a different name. That's why they were able to deploy successfully. But the important thing that I would like to explain, oh, I just forgot what I was trying to explain. Shit, no worries. I'll just keep continuing, but if I remember, then I'm gonna explain it to you. Yeah. So what I'm trying to say is that this location, I'm just gonna reiterate back what I just explained to you, that the location that we are specifying in the Bicep file and the location that we are specifying in the command line to deploy the resource using our Bicep file, both are different locations and both have different behavior. The one in the file is going to decide in which region your resource is going to get deployed. The one in the command line is going to decide where the metadata of your deployment resides. Now, going forward from at this point of time, my best practice is gonna be that I will always be providing a deployment name to my deployment, and if it's going to be a related deployment over the period of time, I'm gonna give it some incremental version as well. So what I'm gonna do is that I'll rewrite this thing, Azure deployment sub create CREATE, okay, create -f, my first resource group file name, so that is coming up here. Oh, my Bicep And then location, let's say I want to keep all the metadata at the Canada Central location. That's fine, Canada Central. I want to give my deployment name now. The deployment name is going to decide how it should show on the on the deployment side. So I'm going to give it a name. Since because I'm deploying Canada East, I will be naming it in the exact way so that I can get a reference what exactly it's going to be about. CE. I will put debug for for fun purpose that it's showing the all the status, and I'm gonna press enter. Okay, what crazy thing happened? We gave a new name, and if we go to the deployment, we will be seeing with that with that entry in the deployment history. Now here you are seeing that I did something, and it's kind of created a deployment history here. But let's say I want to modify a tag with the same name. So my best practice is that, okay, whatever is present, because there is another change, I'm gonna give an incremental version to the deployment name, because it will help me to create a new entry in the history, and I will do my change as well. Even though I don't do, it's gonna deploy and validate, it's gonna bring no change. But let me, for the sake, write, I will write team, and I will write team application. Let's say it's the resources for the application team. I provided a new tag, and it's gonna modify the existing resource. Okay, let's now use the what if command to show here how this change is going to affect my existing resource, because the Bicep does not know what's present already, right? It's not a state management configuration. I mean, it's not actively managing the state. If you did something directly on the portal, it's not going to know by itself, obviously, because it's not in sync in any way. But here what it's saying, that in the resource group, you are gonna modify the tags and gonna add the application. So there is going to be a modification, and something is getting created inside that existing thing, and it's showing that what it's going to create, and we are happy. Okay, we actually wanted to do this, so we know that, okay, this change looks promising. I'm gonna put a new version of the deployment name so that I can see one more entry, and it will tell me in future, or maybe if I want to look back, that what was the history, then it will show me that, okay, we were trying a lot of time on that day, let's say on 23rd of Jan, and we created a version 1, because in the version 1 it's not gonna show what you did here, but it's gonna, if you go here, so it will show that the latest property what we did is have in the CE we got one more tag. Let's say here we got one more tag, team application. Now for whatever reason, we for whatever reason, okay, let me first, we decided, okay, we do not want to keep the tag name, we removed it, and now because this is a new change and new entry, I'm from the best practice point of view, I should update my entry so that I can get a new entry on the Azure, and I'll do the deployment. This will remove, and even though it's not going to create anything new or something new, because how Azure works, it's kind of do the incremental change. If a specific resource is existing with a specific name and unique in a resource group, and you are trying something modify with the same name, it's gonna make the changes on top of the same resource. But if it didn't find that name, it's gonna create it for you. So that's how Azure Bicep or ARM works. But CLI, with CLI or with the Bicep or with the Azure HTTP APIs, you can delete things, but Bicep does not provide you any way to delete things. If you remove something from the Bicep file, it's just not gonna do anything about it, but it's not gonna delete things for you. So this got updated as per our learning so far. It should be creating a new right now it's not showing. If I do a refresh, ideally it should be showing resource group 2. Oh my god, it didn't. Why? It should be, because we have provided a new name, so it should be showing us a resource group 2. It's not showing. We'll do a couple of more refresh, but let me do the portal refresh itself. I mean, it's weird because technically it should be having an entry. Oh my god, it's crazy. Oh, my bad. So see, this is the benefit of kind of using the what if flag. What if is not actually doing your actual deployment, so you were safe. You didn't, crash your environment or something. You just had it, so you are just modifying things. Now if I go here and want to deploy the same, I am happy with the change. I just want to see the result in the 02. I will do a refresh. It's gonna create me for another entry for the latest modification which I did for an existing service or existing resource. So here it is showing me here. If I go to that resource, Canada East, and my application get updated. So this is the behavior. Now as you have observed that we have not used any parameter file or any bicep param file, and the CLI is also not complaining about it because we did not mention anything about it, right? The reason is that there are all the default values present here. You have already providing the default value to the name, which is must needed for us to deploy resource group. We are default providing the location. We are default providing the environment tags. So we are now in a way setting the default value of our deployment of a specific file, right? But the problem which we are facing is that every time if we have to deal with the if we have to make any change to a different let's say deploy into a different region or change the name and whatsoever, we are modifying the same bicep file, right? But we can improve this whole process by including a parameter which will be using the commands from here and the value from something from a different file, right? That's the whole purpose. So for us, we can create a bicep parameter file, and the bicep parameter file which I named is my first resource group. So I'm gonna just name it again, my first resource group dot cc. I'm gonna give it a flag which represents that this itself is a unique file because it's going to deal with the Canada Central deployment. It's a naming convention pattern and best practice that I follow. I'm gonna copy and create a new file. This new file is gonna be in CE, the same name. Okay, my bad. So it's CE and this is a copy file. I'll just remove CC. Okay. The files are created. At this point of time, it is giving me a reference error because we have modified our bicep file and the bicep file is not the same name. Let me, for the sake of improvement, I will name it rg.bicep because this bicep is only dealing with the resource group at this point of time. So rg.bicep, and what I'm going to do is that I'm going to reference the right name to both the files. So now my parameter files are pointing to the rg. How it will help me is that I can write my Canada Central related deployment in a Canada Central file, and I can keep a Canada East related deployment in a Canada East file, keeping the main logic of our resource deployment same. So I want a certain property that a specific resource should have whenever it deploys, but the value and the values which is going to make it unique. I'm all those configurations are putting it here in the in a parameter file. And then in the bicep, I have to remove it so that I can write it again. Az deployment sub create using my file rg.bicep, which is now the rg. I have named it rg. So and f is the argument to point it to your resource, so point it to your bicep file name, right? Then I'm gonna use the template file, sorry, I think it was the parameter file, which will be referencing my bicep parameter rg. So my first resource group, okay, I resource group dot ce, let's say, dot bicep param, and it's was able to kind of get search, was able to update it by itself when you press tab. Now you have to provide a location where your metadata is going to reside. So dash L, it's gonna be, let's say, Canada East, Canada Central, I would say, Canada. So basically, again, it does not have to be dependent or similar to your properties within the file. Why? Because within the file, properties are more dealing with where your actual resource is gonna get deployed, and all the deployment related metadata, they are kind of stored in a place whatever you are providing it here in the Canada East, let's say, right? Okay, by this thing you would be able to, and obviously we are now making some changes which is new to this file. I'm gonna put my default what if and debug, and it is gonna do it. Now from here there is a new phase of new phase of content is gonna come in, some new lessons of where we will be setting it up our bicep parameter file, along with understanding the keywords, what are the different keywords and properties that we can use to set up the bicep parameter file for our resource. So we are going to enter in the next phase where we'll be understanding how to write more bicep things, how to use different data types in the bicep, different functions in the bicep, different ways to write it, and obviously keeping the best practices in mind so that you can write the production or an enterprise grade bicep file. Now we are left with just 5 minutes. What I want is that I will just think and push myself to remember what we did. So I'm just gonna kill this terminal. What we did so far in today's what we did so far in today's video. I'm just gonna try to remember that. Obviously we started by doing the revision, and after the revision we deployed our first resource, which is a resource group, short name RG. At the subscription level, we saw that there are two things. One is the resource deployment location. What does that mean? Where actually the resource lives. So this is one thing, where your actual resource is gonna deployed. The another thing is the deployment metadata location, and I'm putting metadata specifically because that's the information about the deployment. I just don't want you to get confused with the deployment with this deployment with the resource group deployment. So that's why I'm putting metadata. But yeah, this is the information about your deployment. That was one thing, right? The main learning from here is that both need not to be same. You can have your deployment in the Azure Canada East region, but keeping the metadata in Canada Central. I'll explain you why in the next video. This can be beneficial because I'm just thinking, like in a hypothetical situation, if the data center of a specific region get destroyed or can have some outage going on, you can bring back those properties. If you're not using ISC, in such cases you can bring back your properties from that specific your resource blade, and you would be able to get the information. Basically, I'll explain the situation in the next video, that how this can be useful in a hypothetical situation, right? Then we studied that the third point is Azure. If Azure did not find the name, it will create a new. If it did find, it will modify or be gonna no change, right? If a Canada and obviously it always has to be unique. Name always needs to be unique. It does not matter if in your one region you created a name and in the second region you can create something with the same name. It always has to be unique. That's why when we are naming resources, we are putting the region code as well with that, and with the region code as well. So that is an important thing. Now, the another important point that we learned today is that about the deployment history. The deployment history is important because when you are doing your deployment, you want to be sure that each action is actually reflecting on your Azure as well. Although whenever you are maintaining your ISC, obviously you will be doing it from your repository or something, right? So you will be having your commits and history from there, but what those commits actually did it here on the Azure environment, you wouldn't be able to remember after some time, right? So it's very beneficial when you are personally managing a big deployment or doing a lot of deployments. You should make each deployment as a unique entry in the Azure stack, and it's going to keep it remembered for some time, so you can come up with a naming convention. I usually prefer to start with the time, but you can be your own naming convention, and you can provide that name using the -n property of the deployment. So put that deployment name that you would like to reflect on the Azure, and you can do that from here. What it will do, it will create kind of new entry for all the changes that you are doing, and this will help you to maintain the history, the benefits. This will help you to maintain the history. All right, that's all what we did. We are about to, it's just around 30 seconds left. I guess we did covered enough. We were able to successfully complete the first deployment and understand things around it. In tomorrow's video, our main focus is going to be working with the Bicep parameter file and how we can write the parameter file in a way that even though it has its default value, but it's at the same time be unique to us, and we can use each value uniquely. We can deploy things using parameters. Okay, I acknowledge I stopped it. All right, my friends. We'll see you tomorrow. It's already 59:56. I'm gonna just stop recording at